Before the empire, before the fear, before the name that would echo across generations, there was only a boy. Shaka Zulu, born around 1787 in the region now known as KwaZulu-Natal, was not born into power. He was born into exile. His mother, Nandi, a proud woman of the Langeni people, was cast out with her son when Senzangakona, a Zulu chief, denied them. In the cold of rejection, Shaka learned pain, and in that pain, he found resolve. Oral accounts say Shaka was mocked by peers, ridiculed for being an outsider. He sharpened his mind as he would one day sharpen his spear, said an elder of the Amanguni in the 1880s. He worked as a herd boy, but studied like a general. He watched the hunting dogs, the flow of cattle, the movements of men learning rhythm, patience, and control. By the time he reached adolescence, Shaka's anger had crystallized into ambition. His strength was not in title or wealth, but in vision. He would not beg for acceptance. He would demand it. And when he joined the Mthethwa army under Chief Dingiswayo, the seeds of that demand began to bloom. Shaka was unlike the others, wrote Reverend Francis Owen in 1836. He stood tall not just in form, but in thought. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, silence followed. The boy, cast out in shame, would become the warrior they feared. Before the world knew his name, before the spears were sharpened and the impus thundered across the savannah, Shaka Zulu was simply a child, unwanted, ridiculed, and exiled. Born around 1787 in the Zulu kingdom of southern Africa, Shaka was the illegitimate son of Senzangakona, chief of the small Zulu clan, and Nandi, a woman of the Langeni people. Their union was not blessed by tradition, and when Nandi became pregnant, the relationship unraveled. What followed was humiliation, rejection, and exile. According to the oral tradition, Shaka and his mother were cast out. The Zulu elders ridiculed Nandi's pregnancy, claiming she merely had an intestinal issue, a cruel euphemism that echoes in the bitterness of her son's legacy. They walked across rugged lands, seeking shelter, often going hungry, often sleeping in fear. "We did not raise a boy. We endured storms with a lion cub," one elder of the Langeni was later quoted as saying in oral accounts. This early displacement shaped Shaka's entire philosophy. Rejected by blood, he found acceptance in battle. At age 16, Shaka was drafted into the Mthethwa military under the great chief Dingiswayo, a man with vision, with fire. Dingiswayo was unlike other chiefs. He saw promise in the exiled boy. In Shaka, he saw a storm not yet named. Under Dingiswayo's mentorship, Shaka became a warrior of unmatched resolve. But he was more than a soldier. He was an observer, a strategist, a student of power. He rejected the conventional throwing spear, the assegai. It was too impersonal, too reliant on distance, too slow. Instead, Shaka introduced the Iklwa, a short stabbing spear named after the sucking sound it made when withdrawn from a body. Combat was now close, brutal, immediate. We do not fight from a distance. We feel our enemy's breath. We hear his last cry. Shaka was said to have taught his recruits. This was no longer war. This was transformation. He revolutionized formations. The Zulu buffalo horns tactic, a semicircular encirclement with 3 components, was born. The chest confronted, the horns flanked, and the loins remained in reserve, ready to strike like thunder behind a veil. Warriors trained barefoot on thorns. They were forbidden to wear sandals, their feet toughened like stone. discipline was absolute. If a man dropped his spear in battle, he died by that same spear. If a unit fled, it returned to a scorched village. Shaka believed in the power of terror, because terror gave birth to unity, and unity was strength. But it wasn't just the military he reshaped. Shaka rejected the disorganized clan warfare of old. He began uniting the Nguni-speaking peoples under a singular banner. Language was streamlined, ranks standardized. Warriors fed from communal stores. Shaka was, above all, an administrator of war. Dingiswayo, sensing his own time waning, gave more command to Shaka. It was inevitable. When Dingiswayo was killed in 1817 by the Ndwandwe chief Zwide, the mantle of power passed completely to Shaka. But Shaka didn't mourn for long. Instead, he avenged his mentor. With a force of barely 2,000, he challenged Zwide's 7,000 and won, not with numbers, but with precision. One bull leads the herd. If he falters, another rises. "I am that bull," Shaka is said to have declared before the Battle of Goskokli Hill in 1818. From that point on, he was no longer just a warrior. He was the Nkosi Nkulu, the great chief. But the pain of his youth never left him. His laws were often harsh, unforgiving. Any form of dissent was crushed. He had no patience for hesitation. He once ordered an entire village executed for failing to inform him quickly enough of an enemy's movement. "Delay is betrayal. Hesitation is death," he said, echoing a lesson learned in his mother's tears. Thus, the forge completed its work. Shaka emerged not only with hardened flesh, but with a mind sharpened by trauma and a vision clearer than most kings of his time. He was more than a man. He was a reckoning. The age of Zulu ascendancy had begun. Before Shaka, battles were more symbolic than decisive. After Shaka, war became transformation. In the early 19th century, warfare among the Nguni peoples was largely ceremonial. Skirmishes were brief. Spears were thrown from afar. Conflicts ended with few deaths. Power shifted through cattle raids, not conquest. But Shaka Zulu, born of pain, exile, and fire, saw war as something else. A forge, a test, a tool to reshape destiny. While serving under Chief Dingiswayo of the Mthethwa, Shaka absorbed every lesson. He wasn't the strongest, but he was the most observant. And soon, he would become the most feared. If a man throws a spear and misses, he lives. If he charges and stabs, he wins or dies. That is courage. That is Zulu. Shaka revolutionized Zulu warfare with a single weapon, the Iklwa, a short stabbing spear, named for the gut-wrenching sound it made when pulled from the enemy's body. He discarded the long throwing assegai, too imprecise, too detached. But the weapon was only the beginning. Shaka's genius lay in systems. He organized his warriors into age-grade regiments called impi, drilled them daily, and instilled an unbreakable rhythm of discipline. Each regiment wore distinct headdresses and pelts. Each had pride, identity, Zulu. His battlefield formations were revolutionary. The buffalo horns strategy became legendary. The chest, Isifuba, engaged the enemy directly. The horns, Izimpondo, flanked and encircled. The loins, Umavalendlela, the reserves, waited to strike the final blow. It mirrored Roman tactics. It rivaled Napoleonic discipline, and it was born in the bushlands of southeastern Africa, without maps or muskets. We did not know we could move like one creature until Shaka made us one. Elder testimony collected by Alfred Bryant, 1929. Shaka ran his regiments with ruthless resolve. Warriors were expected to run barefoot across thorny ground. to march 50 miles and fight. Cowards were executed. Survivors were honored. But this was no empty cruelty. It was preparation for survival. Europe was approaching. Muskets, merchants, missionaries. A world of domination. Shaka's people would not meet it weak. By 1820, Shaka's impis had swept across the land, subjugating clans, integrating the skilled, and obliterating the defiant. He created not just an army, but a nation. His victories sparked what would later be called the Mavakana, the crushing, a wave of migration, war, and upheaval that reshaped southern Africa. Some see only the destruction, but within it, Shaka forged a new political reality, an African consolidation unprecedented in scale. Like Caesar, he centralized power. Like Alexander, he demanded loyalty. Like Napoleon, he changed the map. Yet unlike them, Shaka ruled with no steel armor, no gunpowder, and no printing press. His was a kingdom of memory, song, and motion. A state carved from rhythm and spear point. The soil remembers the footfalls of a disciplined army, and the sky, the songs they sang. Shaka had transformed the art of war, but soon he would face a challenge far deadlier than any enemy clan: betrayal from within. What is a nation if not a shared will, hardened in suffering and sharpened in survival? As the 1810s unfolded, Shaka Kasenzanga Kona transformed from a brilliant warrior into an empire builder. The Mthethwa kingdom had given him room to grow, but his vision was too vast to be contained. When Chief Dingiswayo was killed by the Ndwandwe, the Mthethwa confederacy fractured. And in that chaos, Shaka rose, not by inheritance but by strategy, innovation, and raw will. He united scattered clans under a single identity: Zulu. Not just a name, but a discipline, a creed, a purpose. One Zulu proverb, passed down in oral tradition, captures the time. Our enemies do not see our shadow because we walk as one. Shaka reorganized society with military logic. Every able-bodied man became a soldier. Every soldier, a brother in arms. Regiments, amabuto, were categorized by age and kept in disciplined barracks. Marriage was forbidden until military service was complete. Loyalty to the king came first. Even hunting was outlawed unless approved. Why chase game when your spear must be sharp for war? He built military kraals across the region, ruthlessly efficient centers of training, ideology, and control. Oral testimony from a later Zulu elder recounted, "We were not born Zulu. We were forged. We ate from one pot, slept with one dream, fought with one breath." Shaka's campaigns against neighboring clans were swift and brutal, but they weren't driven by greed. They were strategic. His enemies weren't always destroyed. Many were absorbed, rebuilt, retrained. Those who resisted faced annihilation. Those who submitted often became allies. In 1818, Shaka faced his greatest rival yet, Zwide, the powerful Ndwandwe chief. Their clash would reshape southern Africa. The Battle of Krukli Hill would define the era. Zwide had numbers, Shaka had the terrain and timing. Using a feint retreat, Shaka lured the Ndwandwe uphill. His flanks swooped like wings, his impi crushed them from three sides. The Zulu didn't just win, they humiliated a vastly superior force. Zwide escaped, but his legend was shattered. British historian Donald Morris, in The Washing of the Spears, notes, "Shaka understood warfare as few Africans had before him, perhaps as few men ever have. His tactics were Napoleonic in scope, African in genius." And yet, unlike European monarchs, Shaka did not war for territory alone. He warred for identity. Each battle was a forging of one people from many tribes, A shared trauma, yes, but also a shared triumph. Shaka's kingdom expanded rapidly, and so did his reputation. He was called the Black Napoleon by some, Nkosi, the King of Kings by others. But with greatness came dread. The line between visionary and tyrant blurred. By 1820, over 250,000 people had been brought under Zulu control. His enemies spoke of massacres and burned villages. Survivors whispered of nights where the stars were blacked out by smoke. But within Zulu territory, order reigned. Crime was rare. Trade routes were secured. His rule, though ironclad, brought stability. Still, cracks began to show. The costs of constant warfare strained his people. And while his empire grew in fame, so too did his enemies, from within and without. As Shaka looked outward to consolidate his borders, inside his kingdom, betrayal quietly brewed. The next chapter of Shaka's story would not be written in bloodless triumph, but in betrayal, disillusionment, and shadows gathering behind the throne. The higher a fire rises, the longer the shadows it casts. Shaka Zulu had conquered more than just territory. He had conquered the hearts and minds of his people. But empires are not held by strength alone. They are held by trust. And trust, once cracked, spreads like lightning through dry plains. As the 1820s dawned, Shaka stood unchallenged across the southeastern expanse of Africa. His impis had vanquished the Ndwandwe, crushed rival clans, and pushed his sphere of influence beyond the Thukela River. But his power came at a cost. Decades of warfare had left a generation weary. Crops had been trampled under marching feet. Fathers were lost to endless campaigns. And behind Shaka's grand reforms, the people began to whisper, "When will the war end?" After the death of his mother, Queen Nandi, in 1827, the king began to unravel. Shaka had adored her. Nandi had been more than a mother. She had been his anchor, his moral compass, his only emotional sanctuary. When she died, something in Shaka snapped. According to oral accounts and early colonial observers, Shaka descended into grief-driven paranoia. He ordered that no crops be planted for a year. No milk was to be consumed. Women who became pregnant were executed. Thousands mourned, many by force, some by conviction, but all in fear. Historian Dan Wiley notes in Myth of Iron, "It was as though the king declared war on the very idea of joy itself." And in the background, conspiracies brewed. Two men moved silently in the court's shadows. Dingane, Shaka's half-brother, calculating, brooding, and Minhlangana, another royal sibling, bitter from being overlooked. They were joined by Mbofa, a trusted servant turned schemer. They saw what others feared to admit, that Shaka's grief had become dangerous, that his brilliance had become obsession, and that his death might be the only way to restore peace. But this was no simple fratricide. It was betrayal at the heart of the kingdom, an act born not from ambition alone, but desperation. Yet history would judge them harshly. On September 22, 1828, the deed was done. Shaka was summoned to a private meeting near Kwadukuza. There, in a moment of horrifying silence, he was stabbed, once, then again, and again. Mbofa struck first, but it was Dingane who plunged the final blow. The king who had united dozens of clans, who had stood undefeated by war, fell not to an enemy's blade, but to the hands of his own blood. Oral accounts say he whispered, as he died, "Are you stabbing me, kings of the earth? You will not rule long. I conquered the world, but not my brothers." Thus ended the reign of Shaka Zulu, born of struggle, defined by fire, ended by betrayal. But his death did not bring peace. Dingane would rule in paranoia. The empire would fragment. The Boers would come. The British would come. And the age of African empires would teeter on the edge. Yet still, his legacy endured. Through the regiments he trained. Through the discipline he carved into a people. Through the memory that refused to die. Historian John Laband once said, "Shaka did not just make an empire, he made a mythology, one that would outlive kings, colonies, and even nations." He fell, but his shadow never did. Shaka Zulu, son of Nandi, child of exile, became a name feared by empires, yet remembered by generations. His kingdom was shattered. His rule ended in betrayal. But the spirit of his legacy did not fade. It adapted. It endured. And today, it rises again. Shaka was never just a warrior king. He was a visionary architect of unity. In an age when European maps divided Africa by lines they had no right to draw, Shaka had already drawn something greater: a people, a nation, a purpose. He brought over 250 scattered clans under one banner. He developed a system of citizenship based not on bloodline, but on loyalty. He empowered merit over privilege, skill over inheritance. "He gave us a name," said one Zulu elder. "Before Shaka, we were many. After Shaka, we were Zulu." But history, especially African history, has often been filtered through foreign eyes. To the British, he was a tyrant. To apartheid historians, he was a footnote, sanitized or demonized. They spoke of his brutality, rarely of his reforms. They spoke of his wars, rarely of his reasoning. They called him savage, but they copied his military brilliance. In 2010, a British military historian wrote, "Shaka Zulu was perhaps the greatest field commander Africa ever produced. Napoleon would have recognized his mind immediately." Yet, it was not the battlefield that defined him. It was his dream. He dreamed of a self-sufficient Africa, bound not by tribalism, but unity. He banned alcohol. He developed grain storage systems to survive famine. He created systems of centralized governance. In a time when Africa was being carved for exploitation, Shaka was organizing for resilience. But such men rarely survive their vision. The colonial world feared what he represented, an Africa that governed itself. So after his death, they buried his ideas beneath myths of madness. They distorted the memory. Yet across southern Africa, his story was never forgotten. During apartheid, his name became a code for resistance. His image painted on prison walls, his quotes whispered in protest songs. "He is the spear that does not rust," they said. And now, across Africa, a new generation looks back. They no longer ask only, "What did Shaka do?" They ask, "Why was he erased? What are they afraid we might remember?" His story matters now more than ever. In a world still grappling with the legacies of colonial borders, tribal divisions, and stolen narratives, Shaka's life is a mirror and a map. He showed that African leadership did not begin with foreign intervention, that statecraft, diplomacy, innovation, and military sophistication were not imported, but indigenous. "We were nations before they drew maps," says one modern Zulu scholar. Shaka proved it. And perhaps most painfully, his life reminds us that Africa's greatest threats have often come from within. Shaka was not killed by the British. He was not felled in war. He was betrayed by blood. His own brothers manipulated by fear, jealousy, and politics. It is a lesson not just of greatness, but of vulnerability. of how easily vision can be undone when unity is lost. But even in death, he left behind more than an empire. He left behind a blueprint for unity beyond bloodline, for strength built on strategy, for resistance not just of arms but of mind. Today, monuments bear his name. Streets run through cities in his honor. But more importantly, his story lives in the hearts of the Zulu people and in all Africans who dare to imagine a future shaped by their own hands. The British broke the spear, one young South African poet wrote, but they could not break the hand that held it. So we remember not just the battles, the reforms, or the betrayal. We remember the man who believed Africa was not a land to be tamed, but a people to be empowered. He was Shaka Zulu, born in shame, forged in fire, buried in betrayal, but remembered as a king.